Several early forms of serfdom emerged as far back as the 9th century in Russia. Individuals who were possessed by others as chattel property were referred to as kholopi. This word shares its root with other Slavic terms for man, boy, or person, and can still be found in modern words like człowiec, človek, or człowiek. A person could become a cholop by being captured in war, by selling themselves into servitude due to poverty, by being sold for debts, committing a crime, or even through marriage to another cholop. A cholop's master had unlimited power over their life. He could kill them, sell them, or transfer ownership to settle a debt. However, the master was also responsible for the cholop's actions, such as if they insulted a free man or committed theft, so keeping them tightly controlled was a matter of necessity. By 1723, Peter the Great enacted legal reforms that required the manumission, or buying out of bondage of all cholopi, particularly after the death of their owners. This gradual elimination of cholopstvo marked a shift, as these people were now moved onto permanent estates, a system paralleling another form of Russian serfdom called krepostnoye pravo. The word serf itself comes from the Middle French word, which is derived from the Latin servus, or slave. Serfs had a specific place within feudal society. In exchange for protection, a serf lived and worked on a plot of land within the lord's manor. In theory, this estate system had a degree of reciprocity. In practice, well, that's another story. Unlike cholopi, a lord could not sell his serfs directly, but if he chose to sell or dispose of the land, the serfs were bound to it and would now serve their new lord. Serfs were forbidden from abandoning their land without permission, nor did they possess any legal title to it. This form of Russian serfdom took root in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, becoming formalized under Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich. As tighter control over the movement of peasants was deemed necessary, laws were soon passed to prevent serfs from absconding to less controlled frontiers, enemy countries, or worse, more lenient landlords. In Western Europe, the devastation of the bubonic plague had resulted in such severe labour shortages that peasants, particularly in England, came into high demand. They gradually came to obtain some civil rights, along with reasonable wages, a degree of freedom of movement, and, most shocking of all, even the right to own property. This newfound freedom spurred entrepreneurial activity, increasing productivity and boosting national prosperity. But in Russia, deeply ingrained traditionalism, built on pious submission to authority, slowed any movement toward similar changes. Vast distances and the isolation of estates made it difficult for peasants to organize, though from time to time whole regions would erupt into rebellion, requiring entire armies to crush them. External invasions from all directions kept Russia in a near constant state of war readiness. Consequently, peasant rebellions, no matter how small, were treated as treasonous, with little sympathy from the monarchy. The barons, operating largely without royal oversight, subjected their serfs to brutal servitude, as well as arbitrary taxation, military service, and forced labour. Villages would often be left without men for months at a time, as the lords pressed them into military service. Yet the serfs were still required to pay rent and dues. Failure to do so often resulted in torture or punishment, which could even include the sale of their families, despite it being technically illegal. Eventually, whole villages were traded in open markets, gifted to other nobles, or sold to work in mines or on massive building projects. There were very few options for redress of abuse or injustice. One exception was an old tradition in some duchies that allowed a serf to leave an abusive master during the week of the Feast of St. George, though this opportunity came with an exit fee that few could ever afford. This problematic tradition was, of course, gradually extinguished, and laws criminalizing flight and harboring fugitive serfs soon followed. As the population expanded, doubling and then quadrupling in the 18th century, these land-bonded peasants became increasingly indistinguishable from cholopi, and sale markets once again sprang up across Russia to meet the demand for free labour. The monarchy often turned a blind eye to the abuses within the serfdom system, purely in exchange for loyalty from the barons. However, with Russia's population rapidly expanding, some rulers understood that showing concern for the peasantry might be a way to leverage their loyalty against the powerful and unruly barons. Peter the Great was perhaps the first to seriously consider this, and some of his legislation was aimed at limiting the hereditary privileges of the barons and church estates. He introduced a poll tax on serf households that bypassed the corrupt and predatory estate lords who were often responsible for tax collection. These reforms increased national revenue at the expense of reduced estate income, and they could have potentially led to the eventual abolition of serfdom altogether. Unfortunately, after Peter's death, many of these reforms were quickly repealed, and the burdens of the peasantry only intensified, leading to a cycle of uprisings, government paranoia, and then further repression. It wasn't until 1861 that Tsar Alexander II formally abolished serfdom. But in the meantime, rulers like Catherine the Great at least began to implement modest reforms that benefited serfs living on crown land or those under direct royal patronage.